Today we will be exploring the ethical issue of incest through two major moral theories, Kantian ethics and utilitarianism. While incest is widely regarded as taboo, examining it through these ethical lenses helps us understand why it's seen as wrong, whether because of universal moral duties or because of harmful consequences. Incest is generally defined as sexual relations or marriage between people who are closely related by blood, for example, between a parent and child, siblings, or other close relatives. First, consent can be complicated because family relationships often involve power differences, for example, between a parent and a child, which makes it hard to know if both people are truly free to choose. Incest can cause serious harm, including emotional distress, family conflict, and genetic risk if children are involved. It challenges moral boundaries since families are built on care and trust, not sexual relationships. Crossing that line can damage the very foundation of what family means. If incest were made a universal law, that is, if sexual relations among family members were universally accepted, it could undermine the institution of family as a moral and social foundation. Families would no longer provide the kind of trust, security, and unconditional love that depend on non sexual relationships. So, from this standpoint, the maxim of engaging in incest cannot be universalized without contradiction. It destroys the moral function of family relationships, which presuppose non sexual intimacy and mutual respect. In incest, Kant would argue individuals risk treating one another as objects of desire rather than as autonomous, rational beings. Even if both parties consent, sexual desire within a familiar context blurs the line between respecting the other's autonomy and using them to satisfy one's impulses, which is something that Kant associates with self-debasement and the loss of dignity. Kant himself describes sexual activity in general as morally permissible only within marriage, because marriage represents a mutual recognition of personhood. For Kant, moral worth arises from acting out of duty, not inclination. Incest being driven by sensual desire rather than moral duty would have no moral worth. Moreover, it fails to show proper respect for the rational and moral capacities of both parties by reducing a relationship defined by familial respect and moral care into one of carnal gratification. Kant saw the family as a moral community essential to the development of virtue and moral reasoning. Sexual relationships within that structure disrupt the moral duties owed between family members, confusing duties of care and equality with those of desire and possession. From a Kantian ethical perspective, incest is categorically immoral because it cannot be universalized without contradiction. It treats persons as means to an end rather than as ends in themselves. It undermines the moral structure and duties that define family relationships, and it also arises from inclination rather than duty or moral law. Even if both parties are consenting adults, Kant would reject it as contrary to rational moral law and human dignity. Utilitarianism, most famously developed by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, holds that actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce a reverse of happiness. Therefore, from this ethical perspective, incest is not intrinsically wrong. Its moral status depends on whether it leads to more pleasure or pain overall. A utilitarian would assess the likely consequences of incest on both the individuals involved and society as a whole. In most cases, It leads to psychological distress, family conflict, and can weaken social and emotional bonds. If children are involved, there is also a higher genetic risk causing avoidable suffering. Power balances can make true consent questionable, adding to the harm. Some philosophers might argue that if no one is harmed, for example, between consenting adults with no reproduction, it might not be wrong in principle, but in reality, these cases are extremely rare, and incest usually causes more suffering than happiness. Act utilitarianism would judge each individual case, asking, does this specific instance of incest increase or decrease happiness? If somehow it produced more pleasure and no harm, it might be morally permissible. Rule utilitarianism would consider whether having a general rule allowing incest would promote overall happiness. Allowing incest broadly would likely lead to widespread harm, confusion, and breakdown of family trust. Thus, the rule against incest would produce more happiness overall. In conclusion, from a utilitarian perspective, incest is generally morally wrong, not because it violates an inherent duty, as in Kantian ethics, but because it usually causes more harm than happiness through psychological distress, social disruption, and genetic risk.
To begin, ethical egoism is a moral theory that says people should act in a way that promote their own self-interest. According to this view, the right action is the one that benefits you most regardless of how it affects others. Ethical egoists believe that looking out for yourself is not only natural, but also morally correct. When looking at incest, through this perspective, an ethical egoist might say that if two consenting adults who are related by blood believe that their relationship makes them happy, emotionally fulfilled, or personally satisfied, then their actions are justified. In this theory, morality is based on individual benefit, not on society's opinions or laws. So if both people involved believe it is in their best interest, ethical egoism would argue that their choice can be morally acceptable for them. However, this point of view often goes against society moral standards, which see incest as taboo or harmful. Most people and cultures believe incest causes emotionally, psychological, and even biological problems. Families could break apart, trust could be lost, and children could be born with serious genetic issues. Ethical egoism does not always take the larger consequences into account. It focuses only on the individual personal gain. Now, in my personal perception of incest, honestly, I believe incest is wrong. No matter the situation, to me, family relationships should be built on love, care, and support, not romantic or sexual attraction. It crosses a line that should never be crossed because it destroys the natural trust and respect that family members should have for one another. It also think that it can cause long-term emotional and mental harm, not only to those involved, but the whole family. Even if both people think they are in love, I believe that it is not a healthy kind of love. It's something that can create guilt, shame, and confusion. Personally, I feel the incest breaks moral, emotional, and family boundaries that exist for a reason, to keep families strong and respectful. To sum up, ethical egoism might allow incest if it benefits the individuals involved, but from my personal point of view, it is simply wrong. Some actions may bring temporary happiness, but doesn't make them right or acceptable.